Hello and welcome. My name is Alan, and today we are doing more on this new series, The Executive Branch. This will be the second episode. Last episode, I just talked about the basics, uh, what the president does, what the vice president does, the cabinet. Today, we're going to finish a little more background information on the executive branch, its history, and kind of move us a little further into the now. So, first, I do want to talk about where the government capitals have been for the executive branch, which technically there was no real executive branch before the U.S. Constitution. However, because many people want to kind of connect the presidents of the Continental Congresses and then the president of Congress under the Articles of Confederation to the executive branch, even though there was no executive branch until the Constitution, we're going to go over these since they are loosely tied. But first, let's deal with where the seats of government have been. In 1774, the First Continental Congress meets in Carpenter's Hall in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And they meet from September the 5th to October the 24th of 1774. And I'm looking at my notes, so let's, if you ask here. The Second Continental Congress happens more during the actual war, because the First Continental Congress talks about the issues that will lead up to the war. Second Continental Congress, we are officially at war. And in March the 10th, 1775 to December the 12th, 1776, they meet in the State House in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Now, you have to remember, we are at war during these locations under the Second Continental Congress. So, they're having to move around to avoid the actual British incursions, because early in the war, the British were making progress, although they do eventually get drove back, but they come back in bigger forces. But anyway, from December the 20th, 1776 to February the 27th, 1777, they actually go to Baltimore, Maryland, where they would meet at Henry Fight's house. And they would have the meetings for the Continental Congress there. After that, they would head back to Philadelphia from March the 4th of 1777 to September the 18th 1777. They meet at the State House in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Next, they have to travel elsewhere in Pennsylvania. And on September the 27th, 1777, only one day, they meet in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, in the courthouse. Then they immediately leave to York, Pennsylvania, and meet in the courthouse from September the 30th, 1777 to June the 27th, 1778. So they find a little more stability there. Uh, and then after that, they head back to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and meet in the College Hall, and then later the State House from July the 2nd, 1778 until March the 1st, 1881, ending the Continental Congresses. And I believe that was the end of the Revolutionary War. Let me double check. You keep finding things that you have to look up and confirm that you were never sure. Revolutionary War end date. Yeah, September the 3rd, 1783. So the last Continental Congress ends in September or March the 1st, 1781. Now, they continue to meet in the Philadelphia State House, but now they are officially seen as a single nation, and they have themselves under the Articles of Confederation, the first uh, governmental guiding document. And they continue meeting in the Philadelphia, Pennsylvania State House until June the 21st of 1783. They then move to Princeton, New Jersey, Prospect Farm, and would eventually start meeting in Nassau Hall in Princeton, New Jersey. And they do this from June the 30th, 1783, until November the 4th, 1783. So now at this point, the Revolutionary War is ended. So, yeah. They then moved the capital seat from to Annapolis, Maryland, meeting in the State House there from November the 26th, 1783 to August the 19th, 1784. Then moving to Trenton, New Jersey, meeting in the French Arms Tavern from November the 3rd, 1784 to December the 29th, 1784. They then move to the City Hall in New York City and meet there from the 11th of January, 1785 to the 13th of November, 1788. Before going to their final place under the Articles of Confederation, New York City. And there's some debate on this, whether it is the Fraunces Tavern or Walter Livingston House. There is some question on this. Different sources say different things. But that was from October the 6th, 1788 to March the 3rd, 1789. Now, they finally have the U.S. Constitution. And so under the Constitution, they move to New York City's Federal Hall and are there from March the 3rd of 1789 to October the 12th of 1790. They move again, which you have to remember, now under the Constitution, we do have an official president. So they move to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, meeting in Congress Hall from December the 6th, 1790 to May the 14th, 1800. And finally, on November the 17th, 1800, they come to reside in Washington, D.C. Now, Washington, D.C. has to be created by an actual presidential act. I think it was like the District of Columbia Act or something like that. Let me look this up. District. Oh, cool. Just creation. Founded on July the 16th, 1790. Washington, D.C. is unique among American cities because it was established by the Constitution to serve as the nation's capital. And they say this is Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17. Let me look this up myself here. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17. To exercise executive or exclusive legislation in all cases whatsoever over such district not exceeding 10 miles square as may by cession of particular states and the acceptance of Congress become the seat of government. So yeah, it actually is founded by the Constitution. But we would not actually get to use it until 1800. So they did some work getting it built. And of course, the areas originally seeded to create Washington, D.C. is from Maryland and Virginia. So, but it becomes more tucked into Maryland, as is today, sitting on the Potomac River. So, yeah. But that is a history of the seats where the government set. Now, what I want to go over is we talked about the cabinet last episode. One of the things I do want to mention is, I also briefly mentioned this last episode, is the actual order of succession. If the president is unable to assume his duties, the vice president has to take his place. And then you have several in line to take that, which is the Speaker of the House, and then the President pro tempore of the Senate. Now, behind that is the cabinet members. So what we're going to do is list the cabinet members in position that they would take succession, and thus also list what cabinet departments there are. So we would have Secretary of State, Secretary of the Treasury, Secretary of Defense, the Attorney General, Secretary of the Interior, Secretary of Agriculture, Secretary of Commerce, Secretary of Labor, Secretary of Health and Human Services, Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, Secretary of Transportation, Secretary of Energy, Secretary of Education, Secretary of Veterans Affairs, before finally the Secretary of Homeland Security. So that's the members of the cabinet, but also in the order that they would have to be chosen to advance to the presidency if the preceding people are taken out for any reason. So now, lastly, I do want to talk about these people that are connected to being president before the Constitution. But again, like I said earlier in the video, it's a very loose connection. They're just president in name. They're not exactly an executive figure. Because again, we didn't have a real executive before the Constitution. But these members, during the First Continental Congress, the president of the Continental Congress was Peyton Randolph, who was in that position for 47 days, and he was the Speaker of the Virginia House of Burgesses. Taking over for him for 4 more days was Henry Middleton, who was a Speaker of the South Carolina Commons House of Assembly. And so that was during the First Continental Congress. The Second Continental Congress, which remember is that whole list of different meetings, started off with Peyton Randolph again. And as I mentioned, he was Speaker of the Virginia House of Burgesses. Then we had taken over for him after 14 days was John Hancock, who is the president of the Massachusetts Provincial Congress. And he served in that position for 2 years and 158 days. Now, taking over for him would be Henry Laurens, who is from South Carolina and was the president of the South Carolina Provincial Congress. And he was in that position for 1 year and 38 days. Taking over for him would be John Jay. And again, these were all presidents of the Continental Congress. John Jay is from New York and was the Chief Justice for the New York Supreme Court. Also, under the Constitution, he would become the first Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court. But he was in the position as president of the Continental Congress for 292 days. Taking over from him would be Samuel Huntington, who is from Connecticut and was an associate judge on the Connecticut Superior Court. He was in the position for 1 year and 285 days. Under him, the U.S. would adopt the Articles of Confederation. So we were still at war, but now we had our own government. And so he would, I don't know if he became the president of the Congress, but that's who the next selections would actually be listed as, even though they are now no longer presidents of the Continental Congresses, just presidents of the U.S. Congress. So taking over for Huntington would be Thomas McKean. He is from Delaware and was a Chief Justice of the Pennsylvania Supreme Court and was in the position for 118 days. And taking over for him would be John Hanson, who is from Maryland and was a member of the Maryland House of Delegates. And he would be president of Congress for 364 days. Now, we wouldn't have another president of the Congress until, taking over for John Hanson would be Elias Boudinot. He is from New Jersey and was a commissary of prisoners for the Continental Army. Would be in the position as president of the Congress for 364 days. And under Boudinot, the U.S. Revolution would end. We would become our own nation. Now, taking over for Boudinot would be Thomas Mifflin, who is from Pennsylvania. And he was the Quartermaster General of the Continental Army and on the Board of War, and was in the position as president of the Congress for 213 days. Taking over for him would be Richard Henry Lee, who is from Virginia and was a member of the Virginia House of Burgesses. And he would be the president of Congress for 339 days. Taking over for Lee would be John Hancock. So he would be again back in this position, because he was earlier before in the Second Continental Congress. Now he's as president of Congress as we're now a free nation. And again, he's from Massachusetts and was governor of Massachusetts and was president of the Congress for 194 days. Now, taking over for him would be Nathaniel Gorham, who is also from Massachusetts and was on the Board of War. And he would be in the position as president of Congress for 241 days. And taking over for him would be Arthur St. Clair, who was from Pennsylvania. He was a major general in the Continental Army and was president of Congress for 275 days. And finally, the last president of Congress who would take over for St. Clair would be Cyrus Griffin, who is from Virginia. He was a judge on the Virginia Court of Appeals and would be president of Congress for 298 days. Now, these are all the ones who are, quote, president, unquote, before the Constitution. Again, they weren't technically executives in the way the Constitution has the president as an actual executive. They were more presiding officers. But yeah, that is everything before the Constitution. Now, in the next episode, we will actually start breaking down the executive branch from the beginning of the Constitution. And this will, of course, mean starting with General George Washington and his executive branch. But I will put the sources in the description below the video. As always, educate thyself, think, read, study, learn. Someone tries to tell you something you have trouble believing, ask them to cite their sources. I'll see you all in the next video. Until then, later.